You're listening to the Dating Orange podcast, and this is a special 4-part series on Jennie's Law, a proposed law that could change how safe dating and relationships are for women and men in Ireland. Back in 2021, 24-year-old Jennifer Poole was murdered by her ex-partner, a man who had previously been convicted of assault causing harm to another former partner. Since then, her brother Jason has been campaigning for a domestic violence register, a system that could help protect people entering new relationships by making past convictions visible. Over these 4 episodes, we will hear from Jason himself and from 3 women across Ireland who have experienced abuse in relationships, and what Jennie's Law could mean for the future of dating and safety. In this first episode, I sit down with Jason Poole, Jennie's brother, to talk about his sister, her story, and the campaign behind Jennie's Law. We also discuss how there's still so much change needed in the fight against domestic violence, but why this law would be an important step forward.
Jennifer was 24 years old. She was the mother of 2 young children. She's born and reared in Finglas in Dublin, and all her schooling was in the local primary secondary schools. Her friends were all from Finglas. She was involved in the local GA club Dáil and has played with them for many years. And Jennifer, I suppose she moved out of the family home in 2020 and had learned how to drive, had got a job. She was working as a carer in the community and then got a job in a nursing home, which she loved and adored all of the people that she worked with. Within 11 months, Jennifer, where she had moved in, there was a girl next door, and they became quite pally, and they were looking out for each other and that kind of stuff. Then Gavin appeared on the scene. Gavin was the next door neighbour's cousin, and that's how Jennifer met Gavin, was through the mutual friend. He moved into our house quite quickly into the relationship, probably 4 to 5 months. And I suppose from our introductions with him, as a person, I genuinely never really liked him. I just thought there was something just not, and there was something amiss. And when if you've that good judge of character, you just know. And there's just something that just didn't sit right with me and other members of the family. But nobody really said anything because it was Jennifer. She was happy. She was to find somebody, and you want the best for your younger sister. But in the middle of all that, you have those doubts of, well, what is going on? Small things like, him driving our car, and you'd be like, why is he driving her car? The car key or the house key going missing. There was times where she started not turning up to events, or the kids would go and she wasn't going. There was that one Christmas that they were together where he sat at a separate table away from us facing the wall. There was just odd things that you just kind of went, that's just not normal. That's just not right. But then you don't really know what people's personalities are. And I know for us, as we're a very close family, maybe somebody from the outside coming in might be like, oh, Jesus, like, this is like a cult, because we were very close and still are very close. But for me, it was when we started to visit Jennifer then, and like he'd go into the house and he'd move into the bedroom and he didn't really want to interact. And Jennifer's children, they would have not having a real liking to him, and we didn't know why. And I suppose as time went on, Jennifer, there was bruises and there was marks, and she always had an explanation. She played camogie, she had 2 young kids, she was quite active. So when you seen, like with my other sister, the bruises that she just had from camogie, even now you could nearly go, do you know what? Those bruises make sense, but they didn't. And she was using arnica and stuff to cover up the wounds, but we didn't know any of those things. And I suppose when Jennifer was murdered, she had ended the relationship with Gavin the week previous to this. And I'm going through the 8 stages of abuse, and I suppose in stage 6 and 7 is the stage where I suppose where they're most at risk. But we didn't know what those stages are. We didn't know what red flags were. And Jennifer had ended the relationship with Gavin, and she had informed us as a family that she had moved him out of home, and that was great. But he had done a lot of damage in 11 months. But all of that stuff didn't come out until the kids were interviewed, or neighbors gave witness statements, or statements to the guards about situations. So there was a lot happening afterwards that only really came to light when it was too late in really in cutting it into the fine words. Um, When she ended the relationship, she really thought that was it. I think she had contacted us. We had a good chat, myself and her, and she was the television had been smashed. So we had given her the money for a new telly, and she was just getting her life back together again. And on the Friday night, he had communicated with her, said he needed a drink. Jennifer went and brought him the drink, but she had went out with her friends to Eddie Rockets. So when she arrived with the drink, there was two friends with her in the car. The two girls kind of, just knew he dropped the drink, and you go and get me another one. It was like that final push. Have I lost control? But not known until you do the research around this type of behavior. It was to see if he had lost complete control. And Jennifer didn't go and get the second drink. And he added the two girls that she was out with that night on Facebook or Instagram during the night to see if there was anybody else out there. And then the next morning, which was Saturday the 17th, he had contacted Jennifer to say that there was no hot water in the uncle's house where he was living, and could he come over and have a shower. Jennifer brought him to the house. She went, brought him in. He had a shower. She left. She waited around at the Euros bar where she lived until he was gone. And she contacted the neighbour, which was the cousin, and said, "Look, is Gavin gone? I want to come back. I don't want to be there when he's there." And she goes, "There's no noise coming from the house, so I'm assuming he's gone." Jennifer went into the apartment from the Garda footage that we had. She went up to 157, I think it was, and at 4 minutes past, 5 minutes past two, the first Garda car had arrived and Jennifer was already dead. He was waiting behind the door and he stabbed Jennifer to death, literally behind the hall door. She had, you know, 7 major stab wounds. She had 17 other stab wounds that were, I suppose, defensive wounds. But what was really, really alarming from the post-mortem report was the amount of bruises and wounds that Jennifer had in her body that wasn't consistent with that day of own wounds. So it was like 86 old wounds of, like, there was bite marks, there was like cuts, there was a lot of old injury. So Jennifer had been through the wars with him. And I suppose afterwards, when the kids started to be interviewed by the guards, Jennifer had to present it to A&E on 3 or 4 occasions and was telling them in the hospital that she had fell down the stairs. She lived in an apartment, she didn't have stairs, and that she was collapsing, and they put it down to long-term COVID. They said that they put a loop recorder in her heart because they were saying, there might be a problem with the heart, etc. But it turned out then that when the kids gave their testimonies to the guards, that they told the guards that Gavin used to put their mommy to sleep on the floor. So what was actually happening was he'd strangle her and then send her to the hospital to make sure that she was okay. And that psychological impact of that all the time. So there was a lot for us to take in as a family, but only finding it all out when we were in pre-trial. And I suppose you're reading the book of evidence of all these witness statements and all this. These other people had come forward that, oh, we did see her with wounds, or we did see this, or, and she loved her work and she started to ring in sick, and she stopped taking pride in herself. Jennifer would never could leave the house without her hair brushed. And then there was weeks leading up where it looked like she had been drawn through a thorn bush. Her hair wasn't even brushed. She had lost all of control because he didn't want her to have any. There was everybody's looking at you. The usual things that we see now from domestic violence, from people talking about it and people hearing about their stories. Jennifer lived that for all those months, and we had no idea. And as I said, she could have opened the shop of arnica when we cleaned out her apartment, because she was obviously using that much of it to cover wounds and bruises so that we wouldn't know what was going on.
Jennie's neighbours had called the Gardaí to the house multiple times because of the loud fighting and arguing. There were several incidents reported at the same address, clear signs that something serious was happening behind closed doors. So I asked Jason if he thinks the Gardaí should have been doing more, if more could have been done to protect his sister before things reached that point.
The guards would come out and do what they have to do, but if you're standing in the same room as your perpetrator who's been doing those kind of things, you're not going to tell the guards, and that's just the nature of it. And that's why the register is so important, because it's publicly accessible. You don't need to have a guard come and tell you that's this person's on a register. You can look it up for yourself, and that will be some mechanism or support, because Jennifer didn't have that, And she didn't reach out to any organizations because, that's just what goes on. Women are living in fear the whole time, but also not only in fear, they're also living that they feel that they're at fault. And that's a massive cultural change and something that we really need to address. Um, and I think with having the supports and the mechanisms and with the register and the supports that's going to come alongside that for women, that's something that might naturally happen over time. There's so much that could be done in relation to domestic violence. It just even looking at the refuge, like we opened one with another 6 or 7 beds, and we had 64,000 reported cases of domestic violence reported to the guards last year. That's just somebody picking up the phone and saying this has happened. We have to think of all the cases that people are not still picking up the phone, and how do we support those people? How do we make sure that they are protected? Where this piece of register, you can open up your phone and you can go onto the courts.ie, type in the person's name, their date of birth, whatever it'll be, and you'll have that. But then we have cases in the media today where people are sentenced to 15 and a half years, leaving people in really, really bad situations. But we still don't have a register that is enacted. So that person will never appear in it. So he will leave prison in 15 years with the potential of doing it again, as will Gavin. Life is not life in Ireland, as you know, and like when he does eventually get out, he's done this with 5 other women that we are aware of, and where he has been domestically abusing them. So what's to say when he comes out he's not going to do it again? The difference this time is you'd only have to put his name into Google and you will find him. You won't find him on a register, but you'll find him on Google because of the publicity. But there's so many people going in front of the courts every day who there's no journalists in there reporting on it. And that's why it's so important to have that register, because I think we don't, if you're being tried in public, then go on the register in public. I know, and I know from probably some of the stories that you hear, we'd love that if you breach your barring order, you breach your safety order, you're going to go on to a register. But that's family law, it's not criminal law. Where it becomes criminal law is really if they have breached their safety order or their protection order or their barring order, and they've been violent or assaulted the person in the process. That would become a criminal offence. And that's where you might catch them and get them onto register. Because I know, just even for me, the amount of I have 168 messages here on Messenger, and I've went through some of them already today, and one or two of them already have highlighted my ex-partner is breaching his safety order or breaching his barring order. Will he appear in the register? The answer is no, because he's breaching an in-camera decision that's been made in a family law court. And family law and criminal law are not connected. What happens in family law court, unfortunately, isn't being looked at in criminal law. Now, Helen McEntee, when she was Minister for Justice, did bring around changes for that. And that is something that we as a family are going to look at now moving forward, where family law, a judge in a family law might be making a ruling over a child, but the person might have a domestic violence offence. The judge in the family law court can't access that criminal law proceedings. So it could be potentially giving children in, and we both know that then a lot of times they're not doing it for the love of the children. They're doing it because now they have control of the mother again. You have to be here at a certain time, at a certain date, at a certain place. And again, that's them gaining control again. So it's about looking at that moving forward as another mechanism. And maybe it's an amendment to Jennie's law in 12 months' time that we would put that mechanism in there. The same way as, really something that has been brought to my attention in the last couple of weeks. Like if I appear on the register and I go and change my name by default, I don't appear in the register anymore. So is there a mechanism that if you have a criminal conviction that you can't change your name until your conviction is lapsed by a certain amount of time? So there's still a bit of work. We need to get the register in place. And then if there's any amendments that, it's like, if you don't do it, you'll never find out. And this is about, I suppose, getting it right the first time in relation to convictions and protection. And then looking at if there's small little things like that, how that could be amended, and hopefully moving forward that's something that will be looked at then.
Jennie's law was somewhat inspired by what's known as Clare's law in the UK, a law that gives people the right to ask police if their partner has a history of domestic violence. It's named after Clare Wood, a woman who was murdered by her ex-boyfriend in 2009. Clare had no idea that he had a long history of violence against women, something that, if she'd have known, might have changed everything for her. After her death, her father, Michael Brown, campaigned tirelessly for change, arguing that people should have access to information that could help protect them from dangerous partners. His efforts led to the introduction of Clare's Law, officially known as the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, which was rolled out across the UK in 2014. Jennie's Law takes inspiration from that idea, but aims to go a step further.
Our law is going to be better than Clare's Law, in my opinion, because in Clare's Law, you have to apply to the guards or the police force in the UK, and they may or may not grant you that information. A sibling or a family member may be able to apply for it, but they have the right to ask. We were looking for a right to ask, right to tell system initially when we started this campaign, and then we sat back and we realised that's still putting a lot of reliance on the guard or a lot of reliance on the system to be able to inform you of that. And let's call a spade here. The guards are inundated with all of the crimes that they have to deal with, that if they're knocking on my door or your door, probably number 9 and number 10 on the list of calls, and they might forget to tell you that this person is on a register. So Clare's Law, you have to apply, and you may or may not be granted. With Jennie's Law, it will be a public register. So once a conviction has taken place in the criminal law courts, that conviction will be put up onto courts.ie's website. And me and you will be able to go on to a drop-down menu, put in the person's name and date of birth, and if they have a conviction, it will appear there. I don't need a guard to tell me. I don't need to go to a guard station to find out. I can access it through the public database that's going to be created. The bill that we've created has the backing of the Attorney General. So once Cabinet approve it, goes to the Dáil, so where all the sitting TDs are, and they will vote either to pass the bill to the next stage, and then once they have passed it, it will go to committee stage. And at committee stage, they will look at it. But in this case, because the bill has already been given the go-ahead and the approval of the Attorney General, it'll make that process a little bit more smoothly. Then it'll go to the Seanad, and the Seanad is where our senators sit, and they will have the option to amend, bring new amendments, new ideas, tweaks or changes to the bill. And once they have done that, they will vote on it. And once they have voted on it, it goes back to Dáil Éireann with any amendments in it, and the TDs vote on it again, providing there's changes. If there's no changes, it'll be straightforward because they've already had voted on it the first time. And then once that has passed, it goes to the President to be signed into law. So it can be anything from a couple of weeks to 3-4 months, depending how it goes. But because this has kind of been on the public radar for so long, and for me, I have met with every government and non-government party, and looked for their support in this, and have put the situation to them, and every one of them has been in favour. So I can't see there be much changes required to it. But I suppose the offences, so the relevant offences under the bill will be for murder, manslaughter, because at the moment, when you're convicted of a murder offence, the only way, I know you might not get out for 22, 23 years, but the only way when you get out in 23 years is if you Google the name, and a journalist again was in court and wrote on that conviction. But there's no mechanism currently recording murderers in Ireland. So the relevant offences under the section will be murder, manslaughter, rape. Rape under Section 4 of the Criminal Law Rape and Amendment Act 1990 in relation to sexual assault. The aggravated sexual assault of a victim, the meaning of Section 3 really of the Criminal Law Rape Amendment Act that was also in place in 1990 will be convicted under this offence. Any offences under any of the following provisions on the non-fatal offences against the Persons Act now 1997. So we'll look at Section 3, assault causing harm. Section 3A, non-fatal strangulation and non-fatal suffocation. It will look at Section 4, causing serious harm. Section 4A, non-fatal strangulation and non-fatal suffocation causing serious harm. It will look at Section 5 of the same Act, where there's threats to kill or cause serious harm. It will look at Section 13 for endangerment, Section 15, false imprisonment, and Section 9, coercive control. So all of those offences, if you're convicted of them, you will appear on this register. It's done more than what we set out to do, which was literally just to look at domestic violence. But when you look at the likes of in Jennifer's and Gavin's situation, the previous partner, there was endangerment, there was false imprisonment. She was locked in the bedroom with her mother. There was the assault with the knife. So they were ticking 3 or 4 boxes. So when we looked at I suppose, the legislation, and the Department of Justice looked at the legislation, it was really important that we're getting this right. So this piece of legislation, this bill, goes far greater than just the standard standalone domestic violence. Because what is domestic violence? We know coercive control can come underneath there. There's the financial control. There's lots of different elements to it. So it's very hard, and as we both know, when you go to court, it's very hard for a victim or a barrister or a solicitor to get their what coercive control is across to a judge, because it's so broad. So when we had the opportunity under Non-Fatal Offences 1997 Act to ensure that Section 9 that looks specifically at coercive control was included in this, was vital. And I know, some non-government parties have already expressed concern that coercive control isn't included in it, but actually it's under Section 9 coercive control, so it is included in there. And we know it wasn't too long ago where the first conviction for coercive control was brought towards the courts. I think it was even put on. I know there was a program done in RTE around the guards inside the K or so. I know they had the first coercive control offences on that documentary. They actually highlighted it in there, and that was the first ever case of domestic violence under the race of coercive control that was gone before the court with a judgment. So we are making massive progress, and I do think, looking at the bill in detail, I think it will be fit for purpose. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, I'm meeting with the Department of Justice, Jim O'Callaghan, and the legal team on Wednesday in the Dáil, and I will be looking for an outline. Really, I would ideally love to see it through at least 3 stages by Christmas, if not all of them. But I would love to see it by stage. I'd love to see by stage 3, where the amendments have been brought back to cabinet, and hopefully that it will be something that we'd be looking for in the new year. But my take on it would be that ideally I want it in by Christmas, because, as I said to you already, and I was on RT just earlier on, and there was 2 cases on, as well as Jennifer's case today, of very serious situations. One got 15.5 years, but he's not going to be on this register.
Jason references the case of 22-year-old Owen O'Brien, who was sentenced to 14 years in prison for attacking his ex-girlfriend, 21-year-old Niamh Kelly, in Dublin. The attack lasted around 6 minutes, during which O'Brien stabbed Niamh more than 50 times. A piece of the knife remains lodged in her skull. She spent 7 months in hospital and is still undergoing therapy. She is blind in one eye. Detective Garda Dalton told the court that O'Brien and Niamh had been in a relationship for over a year and had a baby boy together. In the summer of 2023, the relationship became strained. O'Brien called Niamh names on Snapchat, saying she would be a terrible mother and calling her a cunt, a slag, and a slut. 2 months before the attack, he again became angry, pushed her onto a bed and threatened to kill her. On the 19th of September, while walking Niamh home, O'Brien told her he wanted to get back together. He then began punching her in the face and kicking her before pushing her to the ground, taking out a knife and stabbing her repeatedly. She suffered over 50 stab wounds across her body, broken bones in her face and neck, damage to her liver and lungs, and an injury to her spinal cord which left her partially paralysed. In her victim impact statement, Niamh said her life changed forever, both physically and mentally. Jason's point in mentioning this case is that Owen O'Brien will be released from prison in 14 years or less, and because Jennie's law has not yet been implemented, his name will not appear on any domestic violence register. There are articles about him online now, but many other men who have committed serious violence will never appear in a Google search, and that's exactly what Jennie's law is aiming to address.
So the quicker we get this in, the quicker we can start utilising the system. Because while we're waiting and sitting on our hands in government to go through the process, there's people going to the courts, and there's victims who are going to be relying on this, and potential victims that we don't even know who they are yet. We done a couple of documentaries to highlight, red flags and what it looked like going through Jennifer's story, and you're just trying to hit people with the information that maybe they go, oh God, there's a guy in work that, I've seen that with him, or there's a girl in work, I've seen that with her, or my sister or my aunt or my uncle, and it's just creating awareness. But we do really have a lot more to do in relation to education, I think, with young people, because there's that social space, and it isn't a nice space to be in. Being able to track your girlfriend or boyfriend on Snapchat and knowing where they are, and like, that's coercive control. And the stories that you hear, cameras in people's houses, or the doorbell cameras, and they're being all used against these women, particularly, or the iPods, putting the iPods in the boot of the car so you can follow her where she's going. Like, mad stuff. It's mad stuff. And these people don't change. So we need to have legislation that is protecting people in the future, so that that one strong, brave woman that does take that case to the next stage will be able to get a conviction with our evidence to put this person on a register, so that it will protect other women. And unfortunately, the crap part about it all is women are going to have to suffer in order for people to go onto a register, because it's going to take the woman or the man to go to that next step, to go through the court proceedings, to get the person on the register, to save the next woman or man behind them. And that's why it's important that we have the supports in place, those wraparound supports. Why is it every time there's a domestic violence situation, is the woman getting taken out of the house and not the man? Why do we need more refuges? Maybe we just need to change the law so that the men, or the perpetrator, man or woman, is removed from the family home. Why is it they get left there and the victim has to pack the overnight bag and go? So there's a cultural change. We do have a lot of work still to do, but having the likes of this law in place, will create that process of moving forward. Like, we're on our third domestic violence strategy, going into our fourth domestic violence strategy. What have we achieved on the ground? They're just documents gathering dust. What have we actually achieved on the ground? What has changed for the victim? When you walk into a police station and you're told, oh, you don't really want to be doing that. You'll be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. That's not the response we want from the guards. We want a response that's going to be active, that they're going to take it seriously, and we're going to move this forward. Because if we don't do that, we're wasting our time.
In Jennifer's case, her ex-partner Gavin hadn't just acted out against her. Multiple previous partners had made it known that they had experienced troubling incidents with him. Despite these warnings, nothing stopped him from moving on to new relationships.
When the Garda's statements were brought to the book of evidence, there was 5 previous partners who had given statements to the guards about situations that they had been involved in, or that had come forward to us as a family and just said, I went out with this guy and this is what he did to me. So he was known for doing this. He had a history of it. Unfortunately, those other women didn't go through the court process, but the last one did, and that's why he was convicted and done time in prison.
Jason mentioned earlier that it was Gavin's cousin who introduced him to her new friend, Jennie, setting the relationship in motion. But did she know about his violent past and still went ahead with that introduction?
She was aware of his past, yeah. And she was asked from the mum about his past, and she said he's one of the good ones. That was her response. So I wouldn't like to see what she calls a bad one. But again, he was given a sentence and he didn't finish the full sentence. He was let out early, and that's another aspect of it. If he hadn't done the time he was given, he would have never met Jennifer. But he was let out early, and that's a failure in our system. We have to stop letting people out. I know prisons are overcrowded and they're full. Do you know what? Build a new one. Build a new one. Or stop giving them suspended sentences because you've nowhere to put them. That isn't the answer. When a victim has went through that process and spent months of building herself up off the floor to go in front of a judge and get a suspended sentence, and the guards are doing everything in their power to not have these suspended sentences. Like, I've spoke to guards where they put hours and hours of work in, and they go in to a judge. Depending on the mood of the judge, you don't know what the outcome's going to be. That's not fair. That's not a fair system. We need to have a system where it's reliable and we can rely on it. And I do think there's a massive, massive piece of work to be done with training in our court systems, training judges in domestic violence. You know, I'm not saying every judge is 90, but they need to get in with reality. And reality is this is far, far more common on the ground. And if we want women and men to start going through the process, reporting the crimes, then they need to feel supported from the judge, because at the end of the day, it's him or her that's making the decision. It's not the barrister, it's not the solicitor, it's not the jury, because there's none in most of those cases. But if a case is high enough and you're relying on a jury, you're using common sense there, where evidence being produced. If there's enough evidence, you would hope for a conviction. And part of the conviction now will be that they will appear on a register. When the law is finally passed, it will be an opportunity for us as a family, I think, to maybe celebrate Jennifer's life a little bit more, because it's very hard to celebrate something that shouldn't be. Um, at 24, most girls and boys are only, starting their life, and hers was at the ending. So it's about, I suppose, celebrating what those 24 years are. And to be fair, you know, um, a- a- as much as we have to take the bad of what happened to Jennifer, we do obviously have to, she left two beautiful children behind. And we know from the reports that the guards gave us and the evidence that they had, that if they had been in the house, he'd have done the same to them, because they had found evidence on her phone of threats to kill the kids. And if they had been in there, we would. And the guard told us, Jason, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're lucky you just have one coffin in your sitting room and not three. So what happened was, there's where Jennifer lived, there's like a little green area. So she was only going back to get clothes because they were going to the beach. And so she went back to get the clothes, and he was still in there. But so Zach was playing outside on the little grass area, because it was like a duplex, so he went up the steps. So she was running up to get them, and when she went in, he locked the door behind her. So Zach heard the altercation, and he went up the steps, and he was on the opposite side of the door, so he could hear everything that was being said. And he had seen Gavin then jump on the balcony, and heard the cries for help and the things that Jennifer was saying. She was crying for my mom. She was saying, "Please don't do this. Please don't do this." He was able to give the guards, the person who did it, where he went, and that was literally a 4-year old. So they are doing well. They're heavily involved in sports, and they're, her daughter is like, she spit out Jennifer's mouth. It's actually difficult sometimes to even look at her, because you look at her and you just see Jennifer completely, and it's a consistent reminder. But also, there's the days where you just want her to be there. She was the life and soul of every party you went to. She'd be first up on the dance floor. She was driving, like, you'd hear the car from the music before you'd see it coming around the corner, because the music be blaring. She just loved her kids. She loved going out and doing things and family time. And she had brought them on her first holiday, Spain, the previous year. She was so delighted with herself. And for us, when we were cleaning out our house, and to look at her, like, her to-do list of achievements for 2018, 2019, 2020, and she marking them all off as they went on. And it was, some things was just small things, finding the Santi lists, that she had marked off what she had got and how much she had spent. Just, she was organized. She lived by a to-do list. Everything was that manner in her. As a sister, you couldn't have asked for anyone better. She always had your back. I even remember when I was in work and I lost my USB key getting out of the car. The whole of Finglas knew about it, because Jennifer had it plastered everywhere. If anybody finds his USB key, rather than just saying, "Look, I've lost it," she's like, "We'll get that back." Why would anybody want your USB key? She was just one of those that everybody knew her. You couldn't walk the village with her, because she stopped and talked to everybody. And I think that was really highlighted when she died. The the thousands of people who were at her funeral, the whole of Finglas village, every shop in the community shut down. They had their soup and their sandwiches outside for their people. It just showed the type of person and the type of impact that it had on the community. I try my best to, I suppose, park that Jennifer is my sister, and think about the future of this campaign, and what and how it's protecting others, so that they don't have to do what I'm doing. But then there's days like, yeah, I left the RTE and I sobbed for the whole journey home, and I was like, you know what? it's out of my system now. I've took it a lot on today, and it is about minding yourself. And I think that's another vital aspect of the legislation, is that when the victim has done what they needed to do, it's that piece that they need the support. And I know I keep bringing it back to them, but support is so vital, and family support is so vital. And a lot of times, what happens is that the perpetrator will try remove family and friends from the victim. Because it's very easy if somebody is not answering the phone to you. It's very easy just to forget about it. And go, "Oh, here, they never answer." Look a little bit deeper is what I would say. Why? Have you seen a change in pattern? Have you seen a change in behavior? Have you seen the girly nights is gone, or the night out with the drinking with the lads is gone? And why? And sometimes people just naturally move on, and that's fine. But if something happens like that, where he removed Jennifer from her friends, he monitored her social media platform. If she was seen texting her friends, he'd smash the phone. We didn't know those things, you know, but those are the things were happening because they're the things that come out afterwards, Or if she had a lovely chain that she liked, he'd smash it. She'd buy a Yankee candle, he'd put it over the balcony and drop it because he didn't want her to have a Yankee. Like, because she would buy a Yankee candle and it was what she liked to do, he'd take it from her. So the most trivial things can happen, and that's why it's so vital that anybody who'll be listening to this podcast know that there's no wrong in coming out and saying what's right. If something is going on, it's important to inform your family or friends and get the supports. Go to an organization, link in with an organization. They'll put a safety plan in place so that you don't have to walk out. We know that women are most at risk when they leave. "I love you, I want you," you know, and they're drawing them back in because they've lost control, and that's when they're most at risk. And in Jennifer's case, she had ended the relationship, he'd lost the control. That one last time for them was the shower. "I need a shower. I need to get back into that house for hot water." While she was gone, he wrecked the house. He slashed all the family pictures of her and her kids on the canvases on the wall. He intended to do what he was going to do that day. That's why a safety plan is so important. No matter whether it's Women's Aid or Sunnis or whatever you are in the country, link in with your local women's organization. The support workers are amazing in those organizations. They will meet you in your shopping center. They will meet you in the local park. It doesn't necessarily have to be at their place or your place, because again, we know a lot of times these perpetrators are monitoring where the victims are. And men need to really, stand up to the stuff, whether it's stuff in WhatsApp messages or, the banter with the lads. That's not banter. If you're talking about a woman in that kind of way, that's not banter. That's disgusting. We can have all the registers in the world, we can have all the laws in the world, but if we're not going to, as a society, start standing up for what is not just a little small problem, it's a massive problem in this country, domestic violence. And we're only touching the iceberg as we are at this moment in time. And that is involved in 64,000 cases being reported to the guards last year. And that's a touch of the iceberg, you know. And we know weekends is more difficult when the football is on and they're at home for the whole weekend because they're not in work. There's certain times of the day, certain times of the week, certain times of the month that it's more grueling for a woman. They always fear that, I'm the problem, I'm at fault, no one's going to believe me. You will be believed. 100% should be believed. I want to finish on this point in relation to advice. If you're going to a Garda station, it's vital you make a statement. It's vital that you get the name of the guard, and if they're not willing to take the statement, my comment to every single woman now is, well, if something happens to me, are you going to take responsibility? Because if a guard is not going to take it seriously and something happened to you, who's responsible for your, hopefully not death, but your assault or your abuse that you suffered? If a guard is not willing to take it, get their name, their number, and ask them, if something happens to me, are you going to be responsible for what happened? Because I'm coming to you now and I'm asking you to report this and to take action. And you will see a very different side. Very different side. Lots of women are coming saying the guards are not taking it seriously. I know the guards are busy, but every single person on this planet is entitled to feel safe. And the guards have a duty of care to keep us safe. So it's important, because I know you will be inundated when this goes out about situations, and I'm sure you already have been, about good guards, bad guards. There's good and bad in every system. But unfortunately, we only talk about the bad guards. Jennifer's guards in Jennifer's murder trial were amazing. Absolutely amazing. And you couldn't fault one thing that they did. The guards who interviewed the kids, amazing. But we hear the stories of the bad guards. Just get listened to and just get heard, because it's your safety. And it might take months before you leave. That safety plan might take months. You might need to find somewhere. You might be moving things out of the house slowly but surely, setting up another bank account, whatever it may be that the advice is given. It's not going to happen overnight, but slowly, you can come out the other side of this and be happy again. And that's what's really, really important.
Thank you for listening to Jennie's Law, Jennie's Story. If you or someone you know are experiencing abuse, please reach out to Women's Aid or a local women's organisation. You're not alone, and support is available. In my next episode, we will hear from Sasha, who received justice against her ex-boyfriend earlier this year.